Meeting order. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Heavenly Father, be with us this evening as we do the business for the city and the community and the good and the welfare. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And if anybody else ever wants to pray, you're next.
No, not it.
Not gonna happen.
This is item C, approval of the agenda for October 10, 2022, regular planning commission meeting.
I make the motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.
I'll remember about the end.
That's okay. Item D, citizens' comments. At this point, Mr. Vice Chair, we would allow citizens to speak, but two gentlemen in the back are for agenda items, so if you wish, you can close this portion of citizens' comments.
Close citizens' comments.
Very good. Item E, this is approve the Planning Commission regular meeting minutes from September 12th, 2022. Just as a refresher, we had a lot split for 207 East 1st Avenue, a lot split for 300 East 2nd Avenue, Starbond preliminary replat, Starbond final replat, Arbor Creek Phase 3 preliminary replat, and Arbor Creek Phase 3 final replat.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. Very good. Item F, so this is Board of Zoning Appeals. So this is item F.1, a lot split for 900 and 904 Cloverleaf Street, case number SPLT-22-4. So quick background, Abbott Land Survey has submitted an application for a lot split of 900 and 904 Cloverleaf Street. The application is to split the lot down the middle to convert an existing duplex into a twin home. The difference between a duplex and twin home is a duplex is owned by one individual or company. With a twin home, one side is owned by one individual or company and the other is owned by another. This requires two separate parcel numbers or tax IDs, which requires the lot to be split. City subdivision regulations dictate requirements for conversion to twin homes in Article 2.102 and lot split requirements for Article 12.122. So Article 2.102 for dwellings attached, and I quote, a residential building which is joined to another dwelling at one or more sides by a party wall or walls, including walls of an attached garage. Separate ownership of attached dwelling units known as common lot line housing or twin homes shall be accompanied by a recorded lot split unless otherwise platted into individual lots. So for Article 122.3 for the approval guidelines, no lot split shall be approved if a new street or alley is needed or proposed. There is no new street or alleys. A vacation of streets, alley setback lines, access control easements is required or proposed. There's no vacation or are required or proposed. Such action will result in significant increase in service requirements, utilities, school, traffic control, streets, etc., or will interfere with maintaining existing service levels, additional curb cuts, repavement, etc. The development accounted for 2 units on these lots already, so we're basically going from 1 lot with 2 units to 2 lots with 2 units. So there's no unit change, so there's no impact on services. There is less street right-of-way than required by these regulations or the comprehensive plan unless such dedication can be made by separate instrument, and this does not impact the street right-of-way. All easement requirements have been satisfied. They have been satisfied. Such split will result in a tract without direct access to a street. Both tracts will have street access. A substandard size lot or parcel will be created. Lots will be split into a 40 by 130, and the survey is in your attachment. 59 by 130, and zoning is R2, which allows a 35 by 100 for the minimum. So it is acceptable for the lot split for that minimum lot sizes. Such action will result in a lot being split into more than 2 tracts, except for industrially zoned platted lots, which may be split into 2 or more tracts. And this lot's being split into 2 tracts, 2 lots. So here's where it's at. This is Cloverleaf. This is Cloverleaf Development. This is North Cloverleaf Street. You can actually see here these ones have already been split. If you remember, Planning Commission approved some lot splits in the past, and that's to convert these duplexes into twin homes. So interestingly enough, this whole development is zoned R2 except for the west portion, which is off the screen over here, which is commercial. Originally, they were going to be putting duplexes in here and duplexes off of Martin's Court over here. Martin's Court is duplexes, but they decided to convert these into twin homes, and so that's what's. So these are no longer going to be renter occupied, these are all going to be owner occupied. It's just interesting to see that layout. Financially none, cost is carried by a property owner, legally approved as a form. It is recommended the Planning Commission approve the lot split application for 900 and 904 Cloverleaf Street, case number SPLT-22-4. And just as these ones are also going to be split in the future. They can't really split the lot until the building's actually built, and then they can do a survey and survey the building on it, and then split it down the center, kind of like what you see here. So that's why this one is an old aerial image. That's why the building doesn't exist, but currently it exists in real life. It's just this is an old aerial image. But these are going to be split in the future. And you will see those in the future.
Comments, anyone?
No?
No. We're looking for a motion.
I move we approve the lot split at 900-904 Cloverleaf Street, case number SPLT 22-4.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Very good. Item G, this is old business, there is none. Item H, new business. So this is item H.1, amending Article 12.132 of the subdivision regulations. So quick background, as the city of Goddard grows, the demand that is put on its water and sewer infrastructure increases. This demand results in new costs associated with maintenance, construction, and management of the city's sewer and water systems. Discussion around oversizing the city infrastructure for future developments was discussed with the City Council on October 4th, 2021. This proposal was later reviewed on March 7, 2022 with the City Council and followed up with another review on October 3rd, 2022. The Planning Commission is reviewing adding some language to Article 12.132 of the subdivision regulations. This language will state how the city can oversize potential infrastructure and how the city will pay for and recoup the cost of that infrastructure. If the Planning Commission approves the changes, final review will be with the City Council, followed by a recommendation for adoption of an ordinance that will need to be published in the city newspaper. Final adoption will be 30 days after publication. So analysis, the current article that is being presented for review is found in Article 12.132 of subdivision regulations. The Planning Commission is reviewing an ordinance that would outline how the city can oversize future infrastructure and assess the oversizing cost of future developments. Oversizing the city infrastructure will utilize a benefit fee to assess the potential at-large cost. That means everybody in the city would be paying for it instead of just an improvement district for a short time. And that cost would incur for oversizing just the infrastructure portions. These costs will be assessed to each development as needed for them to connect to city infrastructure. This assessment will be for oversizing infrastructure only. It will not be used for cost sharing of infrastructure that is needed for an individual development. So we'll kind of discuss that right now. Basically what they're saying is that if all the infrastructure that supports a development can be put on that development as specials, that's what they're going to do. But if another development was proposed down the road and we could oversize the infrastructure that would lead to development number 2, what the city would say was, if this was basically $500,000 for this, but it became $1 million for this, the city would cover that other $500,000 at large. And then when development 2 came on board, they would take that oversized $500,000 and put it as specials on development 2. So this is, if you have any questions about this, feel free to interrupt me at any time. This oversizing cost, which is what we call the city infrastructure benefit fee, could apply to any and all necessary infrastructure, including but not limited to lift stations, sanitary sewer, water infrastructure, and anything else that would be deemed as an oversize or a necessary improvement for future development. So that cost would be determined by the city engineer, be tailored for each development, assessed to the next development. The reason they decided to do tailored by each individual development because costs vary dramatically when you propose one development and a future development comes online down the road. Those costs are so dramatically different, we couldn't put it in as a static cost. And so what I mean by a static cost is that typically if you have something like a building permit fee, if it's $1,000 and it's a reoccurring cost, like it happens every time we see it, just $1,000, let's say hypothetically, we would typically put it on as a master fee schedule and it would be covered by a resolution by the city council. After we had many discussions with the city attorneys and we went back and forth about this, the best way to reference something that's ambiguous without putting a hard number on it is through the subdivision regulations. And so in Article 12 of the subdivision regulations, it actually mentions existing infrastructure and it also mentions the cost for specials or petitions. And there's a way that developers can petition the city to pay for that infrastructure and those costs and what that looks like in terms of the petitions, in terms of recouping the cost. And so this would be under that Article 12. This would just simply be another tool, so to speak, of how the city can outline a way of paying for infrastructure that's going to be used at a future date for a future development and how we would recoup that loss. So feel free, like I said, if you guys have any questions about any of that, any of your questions or comments will be used and dictated and will be brought before City Council for final consideration. Obviously, any recommendation you make will be final. The final recommendation and determination will be by City Council when they adopt an ordinance if they choose to go forward with that ordinance. Financially, non-legally, it's approved as the form. It is recommended the Planning Commission approve the amendments to Article 12, 132 of the subdivision regulations. As mentioned, all changes to the subdivision regulations has to come through Planning Commission first. There has to be a publication in the city newspaper, which we did, allowing 20 days to elapse before we bring it before you guys, and then it ultimately will go to city council at a later date. But it is recommended that you approve it, but if you do have any questions about it, feel free to ask me and we can discuss it.
Just for clarification,
Yeah.
the current method would be to do development 1 and then wait for development 2 and then assess those at that time.
Yeah, typically what you would see is you'd see development 1 come online, and all these improvements would be put on development 1 as specials, which is what most people see when you move into a development, and it is what city council has generally said they want, each development to pay their own way. However, if development 2 was coming online and we had to run a line over here that was an oversizing, there's lateral mains that go into a development, and then there's also a primary main that runs like next to a parallel to a development, and it can run up the length of the whole arterial street, basically let's say 199th, it could run up the length of the whole thing. In the past, the city has said, well, if you're going to have if we have to bring a main up 199th to a development or 183rd, that development has to pay all of that cost. And developers have said, well, how is that equitable? If we have to pay for a main that runs up a mile to my development, and then before it actually reaches my development, another development comes in down the road and taps into that main, but they don't have any specials put on them from the cost of that main, how is that equitable? And so the city's been wrestling about this. Legally speaking, we've met with the attorneys, all of them, and we've decided that this was the best way about going about it, that we could oversize that cost so that the development 1 would pay for a portion of that cost, and then development 2 would pay for the other portion of that cost. Now, granted, we don't know when development 2 is going to come online. Right now, we're just looking at development 1. We would oversize on the assumption that development 2 would come online, and then we would assess that cost at a later date. But that cost would have to be floating for a while, so that means we'd have to carry that cost until development 2 does come online. Now, that being said, and this gets a little bit complicated about urban finances, but typically, as you're probably well aware, costs don't generally go down. So when we put if we put an 8-inch or a 12-inch main or sewer line or water line in, the cost is pretty static at that point. You've put it in, and let's say it's $8, it's probably like $25 per linear foot. So let's say it's $25 per linear foot. Down the road, when development 2 comes online, it could easily be $30 per linear foot. So we're actually doing that development a favor, because the reality is that putting it in at $25 per linear foot with the amount that we've assessed or the amount that we have to pay for, we kind of lock that cost in. It becomes static in that moment, and we kind of lock it in time. And so we carry that cost into the future, and then we apply it to that new development. If that new development had to pay $500,000 when it actually comes online, it'd be more like $600,000 or $700,000. So we do the developer a favor, and we do the city a favor, because then we have to borrow less down the road. Because now we're only borrowing $500,000 now, and then we tell them they have to pay for that $500 in the future, as opposed to saying, well, now we have to borrow $600,000 and tell them that they have to pay for it now. And it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but basically we're saying we're putting out infrastructure kind of like arms out into the surrounding peripheral, saying that we're assuming this is going to get developed at some time. The cost of development tends to go up, and developers typically want to see specials at around $200 or less per month for special improvements, and those costs have always generally gone up. And for the developer, it does them a big favor to have the city put in the improvements, because we can borrow at around 3%, 4% for our loans that we borrow, where the developer might have to borrow 5, 6, 7%. So it does the consumer a favor, it does the developer a favor, and it helps us in the long term. Granted, we do have to carry those costs, so that's just something to look at.
It was the overage cost for the oversizing, that is paid for by the city of Goddard and the water customers until development 2 comes in.
Basically, we would be covered. So if it's $1 million, let's say that it was $500,000 for this, and then we say, oh well, it's actually $1 million for this now because we're going to oversize it and run it the rest of the length. That $500,000 would be paid for by the city at large. So we would be borrowing $1 million. We put in the $1 million line. $500,000 would be assessed as specials on this development. The other $500,000 we would be paying for as a city at large for that cost. until we can assess that cost to development two, and then we would get our money back that way.
As city at large, you're saying all the water customers.
Everybody in the city, not just water customers, but
But they don't
anybody.
get a refund when development two comes in.
No, not necessarily.
Are there any carrying costs that are charged to development too?
There's always interest, so
Yeah.
anytime we take a loan, there's always interest. We just get a better interest rate than the developer
But
does.
that gets passed on as well.
Yeah, so it'd be the full amount, so let's say it's $1 million, but it becomes $1 million, I don't know, $1,100,000, let's say. That, all of that costs,
Okay.
gets carried and put on development two. Well, half of it basically, so half of it we pay development one, the other half would be put on development two, so it's split.
Sure.
But it would be tailored by the engineer, so basically, because it has to do more with the use. So let's say, it's difficult to kind of determine how exactly that would play out, because the developer would present something, and in the future development, what that could look like is hard to determine.
Sure.
And so then the engineer would say, well, let's say we oversize, they're really only using 40%, then it could just be 40% of that cost, with the latter development paying 60% of the cost. It just kind of depends. Either way, paying for a main now that runs a mile at $25 per linear foot is cheaper than paying for a main that runs a mile in 2030, which could easily be $35 a foot. So either way, the city is borrowing that money. We've always done specials, and so either we're going to borrow it, pay for it, the infrastructure now, or we borrow in 2035 and pay for that infrastructure later. And it generally is going to save us money in the long term. It just depends on how long do we have to cash flow that, how long do we have to hold that cost over us, and that's just kind of something we have to think about.
Do we have any areas that we're considering doing this in already?
Yes. Yes, we have several that we're looking at. Can't talk about them all because some of these projects are off the table until they actually become public, but we don't know, because we don't know if they'll move forward or not. But you would see them move forward if they did. They would, all plating has to come before planning commission anyway, and then it would go to city council, so. But yeah, this is just something that we've considered before. The cost spreading, there's only so many ways you can cut a pie, turns out, as some of you are aware, and how you cut that pie can get creative. So, but in the end, the costs go up, and how we split it and how we pay for it long term, and how the developer pays for it. We're trying to figure that out in a way that's equitable to everybody.
The only problem I have with it is everybody in the city of Goddard is gonna pay for the rest of it until the development comes in.
Yeah, generally that's true.
Everybody's already paid their specials for their water lines.
Right. The thing is, it won't actually go. I mean, because everyone who's in the city, it's not like they're going to get an extra bill. It's not like you'll get a bill in the mail that says, "Hey, by the way, we did it a benefit fee. Here's your extra that you have to pay for it." It just, anything that we pay for is going to come out of our capital improvement fund, or our sewer fund, or our water fund, or our general fund. We have a bunch of funds that have money in them
Yeah.
that we always take out to do improvements and pay for certain infrastructure and everything else. So it's not that you would get a bill in the mail.
No, it's just everybody's water bill would go up.
No, your water bill wouldn't go up.
It wouldn't?
No. It just means that we would incur debt. We would incur cost that typically might go towards something else instead. So instead of seeing maybe a road get paved, it might have to get deferred for a while until development 2 came online. So there's just different ways, but you wouldn't see your water bills go up. This is just saying that our long-term infrastructure costs, which we incur anyway, would be a little bit more cost effective if we pay for them now, as opposed to paying for them down the road. But either way, we're gonna be borrowing that money. We always borrow money to put in improvements. All streets and sewer and water, lift stations, typically we borrow that. It's very rare that you're just gonna push it off on the developer to have them pay all of it. Because if we did do that, then instead of seeing a $14,000 lot, you would see a $70,000 lot. And then that cost is borne by the homeowner, because now the homeowner has to go to the bank and get a loan for not only the home that's being built, but the lot, which is what they always have to do. It's just that instead of it being a $14,000 lot that you're borrowing money to buy and build on, you're paying for a $70,000 lot. And Joe homeowner is going to get a worse interest rate than City of Goddard. So we incur debt, which is more beneficial to the consumer at large than if we just simply say we're not going to do that.
Does this also, if it's efficiency of money, I would assume it also allows you to expand out more, which makes it more efficient to see more developments go in?
Yes,
Okay.
very much so. That's a good point. At that point, it's almost like infill, almost, because you're spreading out under the assumption that development's gonna fill in along that. Kind of like a road that fills in, you start seeing development pop up along a road, or a rail line, or any type of transportation typically, but having it already out there,
So it's more like an investment.
it is.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Feel free to ask, there's lots to talk about when it comes to this. I've spent lots of time with attorneys, so I'm happy to pass it all on to you guys. Spent a lot of time with some engineers. I don't know exactly why the attorneys want it to be in Article 12 as existing infrastructure, but they felt like it was the most transparent. So I think that's probably because we're saying it's going to be existing at some point. And since it's going to be existing and then the development comes online, I guess that's why they want to see it that way. But I don't necessarily think that's a problem. That being said, I guess it's more in line with how the city can split costs and divvy out development long term. Infrastructure costs don't go down, so rarely, I don't think. I mean, you guys actually might know better than I do if they do, but not sure.
Not usually.
Not usually.
Is this pretty standard practice, I would assume, or is this?
We emulate other cities when we try to come up with these costs. The only time I've actually seen an infrastructure benefit fee similar to this was Wichita. So other cities are looking at them, but there's nothing really to speak of. I spoke with Derby, and they're conceptualizing this. We're just ahead of the game a little bit, except of course Wichita. Wichita has everything first, and then everybody, it just kind of trickles down, and everyone starts adopting what Wichita is. So Wichita's extension program is a little bit more robust, we'll just say that. And that they have some very unique strategies for recouping loss. We'll just put it at that. But ours is a little bit more transparent. But
I think so. I think we're ready for a motion.
Make a motion to recommend approved amendments to Article 12.132 of the subdivision regulations.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
very good. Thank you very much. This is item H.2, the site plan for boat and RV storage. So Don Folgers of Folgers and Associates has submitted a site plan application for a boat and RV storage building located on 6th Street in the cul-de-sac. This site plan application is for the developer Brian Legale constructing the commercial C2 district, a boat and RV storage building. All non-residential principal structures are required to have a site plan submitted. Facade material coverings are required to be approved by the Planning Commission. So the site plan packet is included in Exhibit H.2B. This building, which you'll notice in your site plan and the application that there's two buildings, I split it into two different agenda items. So you have H.2 and H.3. So this one is for the boat and RV storage, and the other one's for flex and office space. So you'll see that. So the site plan is included in H.2. The building footprint is 3,100 square feet. Lot coverage is around 35%. Lot square footage is 20. The proposed use is boat and RV, not office and flex space. Parking proposed is 6 lots. No screening required, so it's a budding commercial on all sides on the north end, and you can see that in your agenda packet right here. So the star is where it's proposed. The two buildings are going to be built here, and then the other building is going to be built over here. But this one in particular is just touching commercial on all sides over here, so there's no screening that would be required. You can see here on the legend that the pink area is all commercial, green is R3, and R1 is the yellow. I believe this is Midwest Cabinetry over here. This is 6th Street, and this is the cul-de-sac. So this is an image that was sent to us by Mr. Legale, kind of conceptualizing what he's proposing. This is sort of vertical paneling, and he's got horizontal paneling over here. So this would be the facade type that he's proposing to put on to cover it per the requirements of the subdivision regulations. This is the screening that he's proposing. Granted, on the north building, he's not proposing, there's no screening required, but if he chooses, he can put in screening to cover it. This is the floor plan, so it's pretty traditional. You just drive in. So this is the south elevation, this is the north elevation, this is the east elevation, this is the west elevation, and this is the part of the facade that he's hoping to propose as the requirement for that building. So this is the boat and RV storage building. As you can see, it's on the north lot of the two lots. This is the parking, this is the entryways into it. This is a 25-foot building setback on that. It was already platted, so there's no platting requirements, it's just site plans at this point. There's a drainage easement here, and a 20-foot utility and drainage easement on this side. Financially none, legally approved as the form. It is recommended that the planning commission approve the site plan for the boat and RV storage building contingent upon final approval for the facade covering. So we do have Don Folgers of Folgers Associates here, and Brian Legale, the developer. If you do have any questions.
The screening wall you're talking about on the south end of building 2, or the flex office. I mean, since that abuts, it doesn't matter because it does abut the residential.
So for this building, if he chooses screening, so for this one right here, he doesn't need screening unless he wants to. This one he will need screening. So the second agenda item will be for the flex space.
Okay.
Screening will be required on the south side here, which he is proposing, which would be that metal, this metal type building, metal type fencing.
So are we dealing with it as two separate?
Two separate agenda items. That way you can kind of consider them independent of one another.
Okay.
That way it doesn't have to be, if there's any issues with one, it doesn't have to affect the other one. You can consider them independent. If you have any particular, questions or comments about one building and its layout versus the other building and its layout, or anything of that nature, they can be considered independent of one another. But right now we're just considering this north lot right here, which is
Okay.
for that. It's for this building and its layout.
So I'll hold my question until we reach the next item.
If you feel that, whatever you want. This is just for this one right now. So this would be consideration of approving the site plan for the north building, which is boat and RV storage. Will there be screening on the north building around it, or are you going to keep it open?
The north building?
The boat and RV?
Yes.
Yeah.
The fence is gonna be sealed off completely, so we're gonna use the building as part of the screen and then come right off the corners.
Okay, so this fencing will go around both lots.
You got it.
It'll go basically around this way.
Entirely, everything except for the gate. The gate I'll probably leave open so we won't look there.
Okay.
So it's gonna be single access in both
Yes.
lots. Mike, remind me what we did to the north of that last time? The
The
two
north?
lots to the north, what we do?
2 lots to the north.
Didn't we talk about those last month?
These 2 lots are empty. There's nothing there right now.
For some reason I was thinking we discussed those.
We talked about infill development.
Okay, sorry.
This is infill development. It's platted, but I don't think there's ever been any buildings there. I guess the idea is that with infill development, there's no specials. The infrastructure already exists. There's sewer and water. I don't have a utility map, and so I should have proposed one, but there's no utility map, but there's already sewer and water. There's obviously street, and so we consider that infill. When you have an empty lot that's nothing, there's nothing on it, and you put something on it, then it's generally considered a benefit to the city because we're getting money back from infrastructure that we've spent.
I don't have
Questions,
anything.
comments? A motion?
Do we have the site plan for the north one?
Yeah, it should be on there.
Yeah, it looks like it's the same as the south one.
Well, the north one is this one up here on the screen. You should see 4 elevations. I'm sorry, 8 elevations total. So there's 4 for the north one and 4 for the south one.
Okay.
The north one is, I believe, at the top of it, and the 4 on the bottom should be for the south building.
Mm.
Is it not coming up on yours?
You're talking about this, that screen there?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Right, it looks like the same site plan for both packages.
It is the same
It is
site
the
plan,
same
so you
site
should
plan.
see 8 total elevations. So 4 sides on the north building and 4 sides on the south
Oh, I
building.
see.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
Maybe not.
It's, yeah,
Pretty sure I
okay.
put that in there. Yeah, so the site plan was submitted with both buildings in mind. I split them into 2 agenda items, that way you can kind of consider them independent, but you should be able to see all of both
Yeah,
buildings
that's fine.
simultaneously. I will say with this layout, the cul-de-sac is kind of unique because they're kind of odd-shaped lots. So in this case, I made the west side of north building being the most significantly exposed, being the one that requires a facade. On the south one, which the south one over here, the most significantly exposed side to the street is the north side. That's why I said to the developer and the architect that they should put a facade on the north one, on the south lot, and the west side on the north lot, if that makes sense. Because if you're driving into this area, you're going to see the west side of this building and the north side of this building. So those would be the 2 spots for the facade coverings to offset that R panel.
Parking gonna be gravel?
It's all paved,
Oh, all paved.
all concrete.
Drainage?
Do you want to speak about drainage for a little bit, Don, at all?
Again,
Yeah.
can we expand that out to see the whole site?
No, you have to
Just
jump
kinda
forward.
see-
Just to, yeah.
Oh, what you did, jump forward
Okay.
stuff. So basically, the drainage is that line that splits the lots. Well, it's the dash line.
If you want to, it's the pointers, the green button. There you
It's
go.
that dash line going right through here. There's drainage easement here, there's drainage that comes over here, and then this takes off and goes down this way, there's a culvert down here. This is really flat right now. And so what we're proposing is, we're picking up here, we're picking up the water from the lot above. We're surface draining down this side here. We're surface draining all of this, and all of that's coming to a catch basin here. This water that's here, that's flat, we're picking up in a culvert. We're taking that culvert down here and dumping it out, same grade as it is over here. So we're covering up this big old ditch that's down through there right now. That's pretty much how it all goes. This goes around that way. What little water is back here, it drains right down along the backside here. So we've picked up everything around the perimeter, and we did take into effect this here. That is flat too. It's just flat all the way out to the street.
And you're dumping it where?
It's all coming down here, and the ditch is down here, and down here there's a culvert that goes out under the street and down around that way. So this is all coming here. We just raised the grade all through here. That's a deep ditch. It's about 3.5 feet deep right in here, and we're paving over the top of that and putting a culvert down through here. When you get to here, the grade is the same as what it is now, so it's no different in how much the drainage and what it's doing right now, going that way. But we didn't want to drop, we couldn't take this and drop down to the grade that's here, because then we would just be leaving this all flat like it is right now. We didn't want to do that. And we wanted to raise this up a little bit.
Yeah.
And part of the reason we're paving all this is so that we can really get the drainage to work.
Thank you.
Thank you. For a certain size of a lot before it has to have a retention pond of some kind?
Typically, it's an acre or more, and I'm not sure how big these lots are. If you're offsetting basically an acre of impervious, so you have to add an acre of impervious, and I'm not sure how big those lots are, but we typically send the site plans to the city engineer. And he has received them, he hasn't got any comments back on it, so if there's any type of stormwater detention that would be required, we would just work with the developer and Harlan Foraker, the city engineer who you met last time,
Yeah.
to work on any type of stormwater detention.
That was my concern.
And the two lots together are just right at a half acre. And they're just a few feet over half acre.
They're pretty small. It's kind of unique platting. I mean, you look at this one over here too. Don't know why they did that, but this one's a little odd too.
Yeah. Save money or didn't go
That was platted. I'm not sure when it was platted. It might have been 1990s or 2000s. I don't know. But it, not like I said, this is all it hasn't been.
Got a property line through a building?
Yeah.
there. It happens.
And this is the concept image that was provided by Mr. O'Malley about kind of what he's hoping to accomplish here with this paneling on it, this gray darker paneling on it.
Since this is industrial area, are we not requiring any kind of masonry on the facade?
It's totally up to the planning commission what you would require as a facade. All the material, whatever, the way it's written, the way it was amended, is that any material that's proposed by the developer as a facade covering has to be approved by the planning commission unless they ask for a variance or something to do away with the facade requirement. So that would be something that you would have to consider.
I know one of the buildings over there has a little bit of masonry on it, but the other one has nothing. As far as existing buildings.
And the reason I went with metal instead of the brick or stone or anything is just put brick over a metal building, I don't care how you do it, it's gonna rust out and you're gonna have issues with it. And that's why I like the metal, just for that, just for the duration of it. It's gonna look the same in 10 years as it does hopefully now, and where with brick and stone, not so much.
The nice thing about sitting here is I can't say.
Yeah.
All I can say, I can't.
You ready for
Are there any more questions?
I move that we approve the site plan for the boat and RV storage building contingent upon final approval of facade covering.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. So this is item H.3, so this is site plan for the office and flex space. So it's the same as the last one. It's Folgers Associates that submitted a site plan application. So this is basically the same. A little bit different dimensions here. We have 8 lots with 1 assisted parking spot. This is office and flex space. It's the larger of the 2 buildings. This one is on the south side. Screening is required, as mentioned here, because it is abutting residential. But as the developer said, they're going to, and the architect said, they're going to wrap this with screening except for the entry points. So the metal fence will cover all of that, meet that screening requirement. This picture you've seen. There's the fence proposed, or fence-like proposed. And here's the elevations. You can see they're proposing that similar, besides the open doors and this, you know, I'm not an architect, so excuse me. Is this a canopy, or I'm not sure what's going on over here? Canopy, thank you. Awning, canopy. I don't know what the proper. There you go. This covering of the door is on top of that non-R panel material. And as mentioned, I believe this is the most significantly exposed to the public. That's why we're requiring that to be the north elevation with that facade covering. East is facing to the east and west, and then south would be the one that the residents would be looking at from the south side, but it's also going to be screened. This is the building that's being proposed on this lot over here, this lot layout. Financially and legally approved as a form. It is recommended the Planning Commission approve the site plan for the office and flex space building contingent upon approval of the facade covering.
I guess my question about the screening was, you know, since it is against the residential there, the metal fence,
Yes.
that fits requirements for.
Yeah, we don't require necessarily it to be picket simply because it's abutting residential. Any type of fencing for screening purposes is acceptable. In fact, they could do shrubs for screening if they wanted to, but this one is more efficient screening, I would say, than shrubs or tree lines or tree rows or things of that nature. So, yeah, screening has different requirements, but for the most part, as long as it is properly screened, chain link wouldn't really work because it's not really screening anything. This type of fence is allowed. You wouldn't typically see that in a residential district because you wouldn't have your neighbor put this up. We wouldn't really allow that unless it was wrought iron or picket or vinyl fencing. That's allowed in residential. But for commercial purposes, since it's going to be on the commercial lot and it's screening it from the residential, it's considered acceptable. And that's not uncommon for what you also see in Wichita or any other city for that matter.
Any particular color of the metal fence?
I don't know, probably just match the building, which is a real light gray,
An 8-foot fence,
6 foot.
6 foot.
8 foot is the maximum, the 6 foot is the minimum for screening requirements on fencing.
Any other questions, Doug? Think we're ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the site plan for the office and flex space building contingent upon approval for the facade coverage. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Jay, well, at this point, if you want, you can stay for the rest of the evening or if not.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Let us know how the Chiefs do.
Haha.
So this is item I, the staff report. So occasionally I like to inflict economic reports on you guys because you're static and you can't move anywhere. So this is some just general economics that we're looking at that might help dictate some of the residential growth but also some of the rental demand. So this came from Home Union, which is a real estate investing software analytics firm. They have determined that rental demand is predicated basically on job growth, migration, household formation, elevated home prices, and lifestyle preferences. We're not going to go into all of these, but hopefully we can address some of them. So job growth, obviously Wichita's the largest job market in our area. And so what we've seen over the last 12 months, and we grabbed this from the 2021 labor statistics from the U.S. Bureau of Labor, was for Wichita is that generally most sectors are seeing an increase in demand. It was small sectors, some of the sectors seeing a small decrease, but by and large is a net positive increase in job creation in Wichita. With the obviously net increase in job creation in Wichita means more people are wanting to move to the surrounding area around Wichita because no one really wants to live in Wichita. They want to live around Wichita because they have better school districts around Wichita, but they'll work in Wichita. So that's kind of what you're seeing. At the same time, job creation, I'm putting that in quotes, is kind of an interesting thing because in this particular case, what you're seeing is that baby boomers are retiring. The first baby boomer was retiring since 1944. And baby boomer is a loose term because it can be malleable depending on who you ask when it actually started. Sometimes they'll say 44, sometimes they'll say 46, sometimes they'll say 45. But assuming that the first baby boomer was eligible, the one that was born in 1944, the first one was eligible to retire in 2011. The last one was eligible to retire in 2030 or 2029, just depending on where you actually cut it off, which means that you have an exodus of baby boomers from the job market, which means that you have Gen X, which is the next generation, stepping into those positions. So there's sort of a cohort jumping, which a cohort is just a group of people, or a group, but they start to jump in where there's an exodus of people who leave the job market, which creates a lot of jobs because now those jobs are available, and then the next generation starts stepping into it. So then you start back hiring for the positions that people move up. So baby boomers retire, Gen X steps into that position. Now you need to hire for Gen X's position. Millennials move into Gen X's position, so now the millennials positions need to be hired for. And then you have Gen Z. And so that kind of is a perpetual growth that you see in any country, any developed country for the most part, where you see an exodus of those who are retiring and those who are stepping in to fill those positions. So it's kind of job creation, but really it's just people that are leaving the market. And so what they're going to do is when they leave the market is that they're either, when the baby boomers start retiring, and as they progress in their life in their twilight years, then they start passing on. They'll, retire or pass away. They pass on that wealth and all that, and those equity and all that assets that they have. And according to the Federal Reserve, baby boomers hold over about $10 trillion in real estate wealth. And so another thing that's interesting about that is they hold $10 trillion in real estate wealth, but they've also noticed that baby boomers are not emulating their parents. So the parents, which is the greatest generation, after they started retiring, they moved into senior communities and retirement housing. Baby boomers are not doing that as much because they saw that their parents were having all of their assets drain away for paying for these overpriced senior living and senior living centers. And so what they're doing is aging in place. And so what does that mean is that the baby boomer will retire, but they'll hold on to their house longer. So since they hold on to their house longer, that means that particular property does not cycle back into the real estate market. So that constricts the housing market. But not only that, since they do have $10 trillion worth of real estate assets, and just real estate assets, mind you, that doesn't count anything else, pensions or anything else of that nature, just real estate assets, then they can invest in real estate speculation greater than any other generation before them. So that means not only do they keep their house that they're aging in, but they also start buying additional houses for investment purposes. And that further constrains the real estate market. And so then what, this will go forward, does not want to. There. So what you have here is baby boomers aging in place, increased construction costs, which we've seen, longer construction times, labor shortages, delays in the entitlement process. So the entitlement process is when they come to Planning Commission and City Council. Those delays, for us, is relatively small. Other cities can have entitlement processes of 2 years, which is pretty dramatic. Increased demand due to increased population have all contributed to increased home costs, pushing the average cost of a house in Goddard and elsewhere to record highs. This is our 2019 home medium cost. This is 2020, goes up to $209,000, and now 2021, $275,000. And currently, based on our data that we have, it's around $275,000, $279,000 for the medium home cost. And so this is according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, state facts of Kansas, the U.S. Census Bureau. So what you see here is that Goddard in 2010 was 4,300, and now we're at 5,084. That was a 17% increase over 10 years. Wichita increased by about 4%. Kansas as a whole increased by 3%, and the USA as a whole increased by 7%. But on top of that, what we're seeing is that those who lived in rural communities are now migrating to urban communities because there's more job opportunities. And so what you're seeing is that in 1850, only 10% of Kansas population lived in urban areas, 90% lived in rural areas because it's more agrarian society, it was more farming. And then by 1950, there was a huge switch, obviously because of the GI Bill and other factors by the federal government offering to those who were coming back from World War II, and there was more opportunities. And so that switch, you saw that about 50% of the population was in rural communities, 50% was in urban areas. By 2050, you'll see that shift has been completely inverted. 10% will be in rural communities, 90% will be in urban areas. And that means that push is going to be on urban existing infrastructure and urban housing. So that's kind of what we're seeing here, and that's why, one reason why Goddard's growth has been so pronounced over the last couple of years. So where are they all coming from? Obviously, so this is a 2018 state-to-state migration table that you get from the U.S. Census. What I've done is I've correlated it with the states that they've come from. And so what we see here is that we get about 27,000 Missourians that are moving into Kansas between 2017 and 2018. We got 7,000, about 7,700 Oklahomans, and then we got about 7,500 Texans and 5,600 Californians. So between 2017 and 2018, all these numbers moved into Kansas during that time period. I don't know why no one came from North Dakota, but I guess no one really asked that. So, but basically, these are the dark ones. Obviously, lighter color, less darker colors shows who is coming in from where. So, where is it more pronounced that those states, the people from those states, are moving into Kansas? And what's driving that 3% growth that we talked about? And then, of course, immigration. So which Kansas county has moved into Sedgwick, which is, of course, that's going to exacerbate it more and add to the more higher demand that you're seeing for real estate. And what we're seeing here is that Butler County, Cowley County, Harvey County, and Reno County are the ones that have contributed the most in 2019 for in migration from different counties into Sedgwick County. Because you're moving from the different states into Kansas, and from Kansas you move into the counties, and then in that county, especially Sedgwick County, with Wichita being the largest city in Kansas, you want to look around Wichita and decide where you want to go, largely predicated on schools and safety, and Goddard is a prime location for that, because then you say it's got a good school district, it's relatively safe, and the Planning Commission and City Council have been keen on approving more developments, and so that means there's availability of housing, so then they start moving in faster and faster and faster, so it becomes a cycle in that way. And that's it for me. So at this point, we'll move on to item J, Planning Commissioner comments.
No comment.
No comment.
No.
No. It leaves you, Doug. Can't leave without a comment. Why does everyone from Missouri come to Kansas?
It's all completely speculative, but normally what you see, Missouri, especially around Kansas City, Missouri, they lost their accreditation for their school district for a while. I don't know how long, but that's a very negative impact on them. So when you have people who want to find a good school district and they look and they see that they lost their school accreditation, that's a big red sign, and they want to go somewhere else. That's one factor. Then job opportunities, and then cost of living, availability of land and housing, things of that nature. There's a lot of different factors. Perception, it just really depends. Maybe the dollar stretches further. I haven't looked at cost of living around here versus Kansas City, or but I'm sure it's generally higher around the urban areas.
How does the school lose their accreditation?
And I'd have to go back and look, but I'm not very familiar with that. But it's probably failing grades, poor graduation rates. There's probably also testing scores. There's a lot of different factors, but if they lose it, obviously it's a big red flag, and it means that the families leave, because the moms are not going to be keen to have their kids in a failing school district, and then obviously if there's opportunities for the dad to work somewhere else, in Wichita, let's say, then they're going to move. It's all speculative. We don't ask everybody when they come to the window and they want to turn water on. I don't interrogate them that vigorously.
Here, fill this form out.
Mild interrogations. It's very minor amount. I guess the point would be that don't be surprised if your house has increased in value in March.
Are we ready for
I think I'll be quiet tonight.
I think a motion we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Meeting adjourned.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Are we offline, Patrick?
Yep.